Hi, I'm Yulia, and this is the news brief. Today we're going to be talking about the conundrum that Putin has found himself in. And of course, we're going to be discussing it together in the comments down below, so you don't have to suffer alone, and I don't have to suffer alone. As per usual, do leave your thoughts, questions, suggestions, and anything you might have on your mind, because I do like this back and forth connection, and it's very useful to hear from you guys. Let's go. On the evening of May 11th, President of Ukraine Zelenskyy said that he would personally go to Istanbul on May 15th in order to have a conversation, negotiation, peace talks, call it what you want, with Putin. Obviously, it is incredibly easy for Putin to dismiss him because he doesn't consider the Ukrainian government to be legitimate. So the interesting thing is that while Zelenskyy quite literally issued basically not an ultimatum, but showed his readiness to talk to Putin, even though Putin doesn't take him seriously, doesn't take the Ukrainian government seriously, and is clearly very not in the mood to end the war, provided that we here, myself included, in Kyiv have been sitting in our apartments for 3 days now, since May 9th, 4 actually, waiting for will they, won't they launch an Oreshnik onto our city. Oreshnik, if you don't know, is a ballistic missile that actually, upon or right before impact, it separates into clusters. So let's say if a normal ballistic missile just strikes one location, something like Oreshnik actually strikes 6. And it destroys everything around its site of impact and is designed to cause maximum damage. The reason why we here in Kyiv are waiting to see will they, won't they, is because the airspace in the region in which Oreshnik is launched in Russia normally has been closed for these particular dates, which indicates that there might be launches, right? Not only that, but also, as we all know, there was Russia's Victory Day parade on May 9th, and obviously Ukrainian drones kind of spoiled the picture of invincibility for it, so Russia might be even more inclined to show their power and to show their allied nations how big and strong they are and how much damage they can cause to Ukraine, which is, again, why we're here waiting for that. But that's not the behavior of someone who wants peace. And to be honest, I personally am so tired of people calling this peace talks because there has never been peace even indicated in them. It's always been who can easily or who can easier convince Ukraine to surrender and agree to Putin's conditions. Because obviously everyone at this point has realized that there is no reason to talk to Russia, and Russia is not looking for peace, and that the only way that they can achieve this so-called so-called peace, which is technically end of military action, not really peace, and I've covered that many times why it isn't, by just basically making Ukraine, go back on all of our demands and all of our conditions, which are not even demands or conditions. They're basically Ukraine saying that we are not willing to surrender to Russia. We're not willing to lose our identity. We're not willing to lose our country just to make Putin happy, which should be normal. But anyways, I'm tired of this being called peace talks, obviously, so is everyone else. Zelenskyy said in the beginning of the invasion, if Ukraine stops fighting, there will be no Ukraine. If Russia stops fighting, there will be no war. And that describes everything. So fast forward to now. Zelenskyy and the leaders of the coalition of the willing, which are leaders of countries such as France and Germany and Italy and other large democratic Western countries, had a phone call with Trump, in which Trump said that he might be willing to come to Istanbul on the 15th. And that puts Putin in a very tricky position, because at this point, Putin, well, again, he can dismiss Zelenskyy really easily, because he's said many times that Zelenskyy is not a real leader, that Ukraine's government is illegitimate, that it needs to be denazified, yada, yada, yada. We've heard that many, many times. I don't need to be the one to repeat it to you again. But point is that that's why it's easy for him to dismiss Zelenskyy. Is it as easy for him to dismiss Trump and Trump's presence? Not so much. However, it is Putin, and he's obviously not going to show up. First of all, he doesn't want to face the Ukrainian leaders. He doesn't want to face world leaders, especially not on his turf. where he can, sit in his chair comfortably and keep lying to interviewers and telling his revisionist history back from, I don't know, 2000 years ago, from Russia being great, great. But the point is that he knows that there is nothing he can say and there is nothing he wants to talk about because his demands are ludicrous and they're ridiculous. And so, what's the point of him going to Istanbul just to reiterate the same lies? He can keep telling them on camera, he can keep telling them to uneducated journalists like Tucker Carlson, who love to spew Russian propaganda, probably for a very nice paycheck. But he's not going to do that to the world leaders because he knows that people like Macron, like Tusk, like Starmer, like Friedrich Merz, they don't buy it. They've openly said many times that Russia just lies, and obviously everyone in that circle knows that Russia lies. So there is no reason for Putin to go to Istanbul to be cornered in his lies. However, the problem is, what is he going to do about Trump? Because obviously, I mean, we know that he doesn't respect anyone, and his so-called respect or friendship of Trump is just a farce, and it's all staged. But he still needs to come up with a legitimate reason why he doesn't want to go to Istanbul, because, well, all of his conditions are met. All of these world leaders are there. Zelensky is there. There is a negotiations table. There is a mediator, being Turkey. And Zelensky says, hey, I don't want our groups to meet anymore. I want us to meet. He wants peace, right? Putin wants peace. So what would be the reason for him not to go? For show. And that's something that he needs to come up with. So far, obviously, Kremlin officials have not responded. And there was an ultimatum from Germany issued earlier that, Russia needs to agree to the negotiations and to the 30-day ceasefire. Otherwise, Europe is going to supply Ukraine with a lot of lethal weapons. But the talk on the lower levels of Kremlin representation is basically indicative of the fact that Putin is not going to show up, surprise, surprise. And there was also a Kremlin official or council deputy speaker, Konstantin Kasachov, who basically said that Zelensky's invitation is a comedy and it's also a spectacle. I mean, comedy alluding to his past as a comedian, right? Which is also very funny because Russians love to use that against him as if he was some lower tier comedian who was barely making it by, even though he actually had a production company that was incredibly successful and that was serving all of the post-Soviet satellites and Russia, and was making grand success and a lot of money producing lots of movies and lots of comedy specials and lots of shows on TV in Russia. So it was an incredibly productive and incredibly successful company that was making Zelensky lots of money in Russia, and it was well received in Russia, and its main market actually was Russia, just purely on how much population there was. So it's very funny that they try to paint him as this failed person who had no career. Meanwhile, he had a brilliant career in their country as well. But anyways, I digress. Point is that it's very evident that the Kremlin is scrambling to come up with the reason why Putin wouldn't grace Trump and the rest of the world leaders with his presence in Istanbul, because for the people and for the government that's trying to push this whole narrative of we want peace so much, it'd be very strange if they didn't show up to these peace talks. Again, what reason would they have, right? There are all of these leaders, they're all happy to hear them out, they're all happy to be there, they're all giving their time to being there. Why wouldn't Putin show up? In the meanwhile, while they're scrambling, their narratives are as follows: that that Ukraine is avoiding real negotiations, that negotiations shouldn't be done in such tense conditions. I mean, what are the tense conditions in this scenario? No one knows other than Putin, who actually set these conditions and set himself in a trap of his own making, because he called on the peace talks thinking Ukraine would, decline them. Zelensky then came forward with a checkmate and said, hey, I will meet you personally. He then was like, oh, it's easy to dismiss this guy. And then Trump was like, you know what? I'm going to show up. And now Putin is in a trap of his own making. They're already pushing narratives, their favorite narratives, as the Kyiv regime, to try and legitimize the government and make it sound basically that there is no reason for them to come because they would be meeting with the government of Ukraine they don't recognize anyway. But hey, if you don't recognize the government of Ukraine, there are many other government officials there, leaders of countries. Trump, for instance, you recognize him, right? So you need to get there and get there fast. Also, Donald Trump recently expressed his support for the 30-day ceasefire and basically said that that would be the reason for him to go to the negotiations and that the ceasefire needs to happen. So did all of the other leaders of the coalition of the willing. Also, JD Vance, interestingly, turned a whole 180, saying that Russia's conditions for peace are unreasonable, while Ukraine's conditions for peace are very reasonable, which, hey, I don't respect JD Vance, and there are lots of incredibly damaging anti-Ukrainian narratives that he has put out in the past. But this turn is quite good. I mean, we'll take what we can get, right? What are the repercussions for Russia not showing up? According to the world leaders, Germany will send Ukraine lethal weapons. The US did say that they would impose more sweeping sanctions on Russia. Steve Witkoff, the special envoy, basically said that the US didn't start this war. It's not a US war, but they want to help end it. And the only way to end it is to start with a ceasefire and to end the bloodbath and deaths and all of that. I mean, to be fair, do I believe that this is going to change much? I don't think so. I think that all of these threats coming from Europe, Putin doesn't take seriously unless really Germany just slams, floors it with all of the deliveries and floors it with all of the weapons and gives us Taurus and other missiles and lets us use them on Russia. And I don't think that sanctions are scaring Russia by any means because, again, they've figured out how to circumvent almost all of those. Their economy can't hold too much longer the way that it has been going, but still, I think the only way really to put pressure on Putin is not to scare him with sanctions. It's for the US to give Ukraine all the weapons Ukraine has been asking for, because that will show Putin that the US is really committed to Ukraine and is really committed to Ukraine's victory and doesn't necessarily care for Russia's lies anymore. That's all I have for you for today. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this news brief and would like to see more episodes, please do subscribe to this channel and turn on all of your notifications. Like this video, send it to a friend, and leave your thoughts, questions, suggestions, anything in your mind down below in the comments, because I read them. I appreciate you guys speaking out, and I always love hearing from you. Till next time.